For years, I prepared for the unthinkable, losing my spouse to a terminal illness. Every day was a battle against time, filled with grief and silent goodbyes. Until one day I uncovered a secret so profound, so sickening, it shattered my entire reality. He wasn't dying. He was perfectly healthy, and he'd been lying to me for years. This is the story of how I ripped the curtain back on his perfect deception and the absolute chaos that followed. Before we continue, if you love our stories, do well to encourage us by hitting the like button, sharing, and subscribing for more. My name is Ivy Scott. I am 32 years old, a former graphic designer turned full-time caretaker, and the wife of a man who the world believed was a saint. The morning sun barely touched the curtains before my alarm went off. It was the same grueling ritual every single day. I rolled out of bed, my back aching from sleeping on the edge of the mattress to avoid bumping Matthew. He lay there, his breathing shallow, looking fragile against the white sheets. I had to lift him from the bed to his wheelchair, a physical strain that left my arms trembling. As I pulled him up, his body felt strangely rigid, his chest and arms hard as rock. When I had asked him about it months ago, he told me it was severe muscle spasticity, a symptom where the muscles lock up and harden due to the disease. I believed him because I had to. I didn't realize then that I wasn't feeling spasticity. I was feeling the density of hidden, well-trained muscle. I moved to the counter to crush his pills, measuring generic white powder into vials. He claimed the specialist mailed the compound directly to us to avoid contamination, so I never saw a pharmacy label. I was just the obedient caretaker, administering the dose of what I now suspect was nothing more than sugar or creatine. Our life had become a math problem I couldn't solve. The medical bills were mountainous, stacking up on the kitchen counter like little white tombstones. I was working double shifts at a local diner just to keep the lights on, while Matthew managed his blog, Journey to Peace. It was his connection to the outside world, a place where he documented his suffering for thousands of devoted followers who hung on his every word. I was counting change for the electric bill when a loud ping echoed from his laptop. I walked into the living room, wiping grease from my hands. Matthew was sitting up in his wheelchair, his face illuminated by the screen. A notification banner stretched across the top. $5,000 donation received from Anonymous. The change in him was instant. The man who had been too weak to hold a spoon 10 minutes ago was now typing furiously, his eyes bright and alert. "Ivy, look. Someone believes in my fight," he exclaimed, his voice surprisingly strong. It was a rush of dopamine that seemed more effective than any of the painkillers I carefully administered. I smiled for him, but a strange knot formed in my stomach. It felt less like relief, and more like he had just won a lottery he expected to win. The sudden burst of energy didn't match the man who had been groaning in agony all night. It was as if the money was the medicine, and the dosage had just kicked in. Over the next few weeks, that knot in my stomach tightened into a genuine suspicion. I started noticing a pattern I couldn't unsee. On days when the donations slowed down or the comments on his blog weren't praising his bravery, Matthew was inconsolable. He would be bedridden for 24 hours, moaning in agony, requiring me to wait on him hand and foot. The house would be plunged into darkness and despair, his moods holding me hostage. But the moment money flowed in, usually after he posted a particularly heartbreaking update about fading away, he would have what he called miracle rallies. Suddenly, he could sit up. He could eat solid food. He would laugh at the TV. One fateful day, after a massive influx of cash from a charity drive, he even suggested we order expensive takeout. I watched him eat with a hearty appetite, confused. "I thought your throat was closing up?" I asked gently. He froze, then coughed weakly. "It comes and goes, Ivy. I'm just trying to enjoy the good moments." I nodded, dismissing my doubt. I felt like a monster for questioning a dying man. I told myself I was just burnt out, that grief was making me paranoid. But deep down, the doubt was taking root, feeding on the inconsistencies I was too afraid to name. The breaking point began on a Thursday. Matthew had declared it a bad day. He claimed his legs were completely numb and that the autoimmune deterioration was spreading. I left for work with a heavy heart, leaving him groaning in the darkened bedroom. 2 hours into my shift, I realized I had left my apron and name tag at home. I told my manager I'd be right back and drove home in a rush. I didn't pull into the driveway. I parked on the street to avoid blocking the mail carrier. I unlocked the front door quietly, not wanting to wake him if he had finally fallen asleep. The house was silent. I walked toward the kitchen to grab my gear, but I stopped dead in the hallway. Matthew was there. He wasn't in his wheelchair. He wasn't crawling. He was standing by the open fridge, humming a tune, reaching for a jar of pickles on the top shelf. He stood tall, his spine straight, his legs sturdy. My keys jingled in my hand. He spun around, eyes wide. In a split second, he dropped the jar. It shattered loudly, and he threw himself to the floor, dragging his legs like dead weight. "My legs," he screamed, his face flushed. "I tried to force myself to stand to surprise you. I wanted to show you I'm fighting, but they gave out." I stood over him, staring at the pickle juice spreading across the linoleum. The performance was good, terrifyingly good, but I had seen him standing. He hadn't been struggling to rise. He had been reaching for the top shelf with ease. I helped him back into the chair, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip his arm. He cried, apologizing for trying to be independent, but his tears felt different to me now. They felt calculated. Once he was back in bed, exhausted from the fall, I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I needed to know. I grabbed the empty pill bottle from the trash can, the one prescribed by his specialist, Dr. Kane. I dialed the number on the label, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Doctor's office, how can I help you?" a cheerful voice answered. "Hi, I'm calling about a patient, Matthew Scott. He sees Dr. Kane for his autoimmune condition," I said, my voice trembling. There was a long pause. "Ma'am, Dr. Kane is a pediatrician," the receptionist said, sounding confused. "We treat infants and children up to age 18. We don't treat adult men here." I lowered the phone, my breath hitching in my throat. She didn't need to check the database or violate any privacy laws to know he wasn't a patient. The doctor was real, but he was a child specialist. Matthew had likely just copied the name from a Google search to print his fake labels without checking the specialty. The illness didn't exist. My entire life was a lie. I hung up the phone and leaned against the cold bathroom tiles, trying to steady my breathing. The receptionist's words echoed in my mind, "We treat children." I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to find where he kept his secrets. That night, Matthew lay in bed, claiming he was too weak to even hold his phone. But as soon as his breathing evened out into a rhythm of fake sleep, I saw the blue light reflecting off his glasses. He was scrolling. I waited until 2 a.m., when he finally dozed off for real. I crept to the closet where we kept his crisis bag. It was a sacred object in our house, always packed for hospital emergencies. My hands shook as I unzipped the side pocket. A smell hit me, not the sterile scent of medical supplies, but the musky, stale odor of sweat. I reached in and felt something hard sewn into the lining. I grabbed a pair of scissors and carefully snipped the thread. Inside was a sleek, black smartphone I had never seen before. But that wasn't all. Folded tightly underneath, it was a crumpled receipt. I unfolded it in the sliver of moonlight coming through the window. It was for a membership at Ironclad Gym, a luxury fitness center 3 towns over, far enough away to ensure he wouldn't run into anyone who knew him. The member name wasn't Matthew Scott. It was Matt Stone, a fake identity I had never heard of. I sat on the floor of the closet, the burner phone in my hand. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would wake him up. I pressed the power button. It asked for a passcode. I tried his birthday, nothing. I tried our anniversary, nothing. Then I tried the date of his diagnosis, the day his life as a professional victim began. The phone unlocked. I went straight to the gallery. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the thumbnails. There were hundreds of videos. I clicked on the most recent one. It showed Matthew wearing a muscle tank top, deadlifting a barbell loaded with heavy plates. His face was red with exertion, veins popping in his neck. He looked powerful. He looked strong. I checked the timestamp on the video. It was dated yesterday at 2:30 p.m. Yesterday at 2:30 p.m., I had dropped him off at the main entrance of City General Hospital. He had insisted I leave him there because the procedure was too ugly for me to watch and told me to run errands for 3 hours. He must have walked through the lobby, out the emergency exit, and taken a cab straight to the gym. I covered my mouth to stifle a scream that wanted to tear my throat apart. The grief I had carried for 3 years evaporated in that closet. It was replaced by a white-hot rage that felt like poison in my blood. I sat there watching video after video. I saw him running on a treadmill. I saw him eating a massive steak dinner in his car. I saw him laughing into the camera, flexing his bicep, and saying, "Still got it." Every tear I had cried over him was fuel for his ego. Every dollar I had begged for online was funding his gym memberships and steak dinners. He wasn't sick. He was a vampire, feeding on my sympathy and the kindness of strangers. The realization made me physically ill. I stood up, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. The impulse to march into the bedroom and smash the phone over his head was overwhelming. I wanted to wake him up and scream until the windows shattered. I wanted to destroy him right then and there. But I stopped myself. If I confronted him now, he would twist it. He would claim it was deep fake footage or old videos. He was a master manipulator. I couldn't just catch him. I had to bury him. The next morning was the hardest acting performance of my life. I woke up before him and put the burner phone back exactly where I found it. When Matthew stirred, letting out his usual theatrical groan of pain, I forced myself to walk over to the bed. I smoothed the hair back from his forehead and kissed him. His skin felt clammy, not from sickness, I now realize, but from sweat. "How are you feeling, my love?" I asked, my voice steady despite the bile rising in my throat. "It's a bad morning, Ivy," he whispered, clutching his chest. "I feel like I'm fading." I looked into his eyes, searching for a shred of guilt, but saw only the glassy stare of a man in love with his own lie. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I'll make you some tea." Walking to the kitchen, I made a vow. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I needed irrefutable proof. The gym receipt and the phone were a start, but I needed something legal. I needed something that would turn his adoring community against him forever. I needed to become a hunter. That afternoon, while Matthew was napping, I told him I was going to the pharmacy. Instead, I drove straight to the address I had found online for the real Dr. David Kane. It was a colorful pediatric clinic filled with toys and cartoon murals, a stark contrast to the grim deathbed scenes Matthew described. I walked into Dr. Kane's office and placed a folder on his desk. Inside were copies of the medical reports Matthew had forged, all bearing Dr. Kane's signature. The doctor, a kind-faced man in his 50s, turned pale as he read them. This is insanity," Dr. Kane stammered, looking up at me. "I've never met your husband. These prescriptions are nonsense." He likely copied my medical license number from a public directory, but he was sloppy. He didn't check that I'm a pediatrician. He looked angry now. "Mrs. Scott, this man is using my medical license to commit fraud. I could lose my practice." "I know," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I don't just want to leave him, Dr. Kane. I want to expose him. I want everyone to know what he's done. Will you help me?" He looked at the forged documents, then at me. "Tell me what you need," he said. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on Matthew's cruel game and executed the most dangerous phase of my plan, I have to ask, if you have come with us this far, it means you are really invested in Ivy's journey. Please do well to like this video, share it with friends who love satisfying revenge stories, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a part. Also, tell us in the comments where you are listening from. We love seeing our global community. Thank you. A few days later, Matthew sprung the trap himself. We were sitting at the dinner table when he let out a heavy sigh, pushing his food around his plate. "Ivy," he said, his voice trembling perfectly. "I've been reading about a new experimental treatment in Switzerland. It's radical, but it might be my last hope." He looked at me with those big, puppy dog eyes. "The only problem is the cost. It's $100,000. I didn't blink. Before I found the phone, I would have panicked. Now I saw it for what it was, a cash grab. He wanted a payout. I leaned forward and took his hand. "Matthew, we have to try. In fact, I have an idea. Let's not just do a fundraiser online. Let's host a farewell gala." His eyes lit up. A gala. Yes, I said, feeding his ego. A black tie event. We invite everyone. The donors, the press, your family. We celebrate your bravery. We can raise the money in one night. I watched the greed warring with the vanity in his face. Vanity won. That sounds beautiful, Ivy, he said, squeezing my hand. A night to remember. He had no idea how right he was. With Matthew distracted by the prospect of being the star of his own show, I went to work. He spent most of his afternoons in the detached garage, which he claimed was his meditation sanctuary. He had installed thick soundproofing foam on the walls 4 years ago, long before he got sick, claiming he needed silence for his thoughts. Now, I knew the foam wasn't for silence. It was to muffle the sound of heavy weights and music. While he was out at a doctor's appointment, likely a movie, I hired a technician. We didn't mess with wiring that he might see. Instead, we installed a battery-operated spy camera inside the existing smoke detector on the ceiling. It was cloud-based, meaning I could access the footage remotely without ever touching the device again. I sat in my car around the corner, watching the live feed on my phone. Matthew walked into the garage, tossed his cane aside, and started doing burpees. Later, he sat on his weight bench, eating a large pepperoni pizza. The audio was muffled by the heavy metal music he blasted, but the visuals were crystal clear. I downloaded every clip directly to my phone, building a digital arsenal. The physical evidence was damning, but I needed to follow the money, too. I waited until he was in the shower and accessed his laptop. I had always respected his privacy before, believing the finances stressed him out. Now I dug deep. I pulled up the donor account records. Over the last 3 years, strangers had donated nearly $200,000. I traced the transfers. Not a single cent had gone to a hospital or a pharmacy. The money was being siphoned into an offshore cryptocurrency wallet and several online gambling sites. I felt sick seeing the names on the donor list. There were single mothers, elderly pensioners, and college students, all giving $5 or $10 to help a dying man. He was gambling away their grocery money. He was betting their rent checks on poker games. I printed every bank statement, every transfer log, and every gambling receipt. The stack of paper was thick and heavy in my hands. It wasn't just paper, it was a criminal indictment for wire fraud. The week leading up to the gala was a psychological nightmare. Living a double life was exhausting. I had to play the doting, terrified wife during the day, and the cold, calculating investigator at night. Every time Matthew coughed or limped, I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from screaming. I know you're faking it. The hardest moment came when our neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, stopped me at the mailbox. She was an elderly woman who had baked us casseroles every week for years. She grabbed my arm, her eyes filled with tears. "You are such an angel, Ivy," she sobbed. "Matthew is so brave, but you are the rock. I don't know how you stay so strong watching him fade away." I felt like I was going to crack. I wanted to tell her the truth right there. I wanted to show her the video of him dancing in the garage. But I couldn't. Not yet. "It's hard, Mrs. Higgins," I said, forcing a sad smile. "But we have to keep going for him." I walked back to the house, my fingernails digging into my palms so hard they drew blood. The invitations went out, and the response was overwhelming. I made sure to invite everyone who mattered. I sent VIP invites to his biggest donors and the local news station that had run a human interest story on him last year. Looking back, I realized that interview was his greatest magic trick. By filming it in our dim living room with him looking frail and bedridden, he had cemented an image so tragic that no one would ever connect him to the healthy man in a hoodie lifting weights 3 towns over. I told Matthew the press wanted to cover his final journey. He was ecstatic. For 3 days, Matthew sat at the kitchen table writing his speech. He would read drafts to me, practicing his pauses and his choked-up tears. "I want to talk about the light," he told me, looking solemn. "I want to tell them that even though I'm leaving this world, my love will remain." It was disgusting. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. "It's perfect, Matthew," I said, handing him a glass of water. "It will be a speech no one will ever forget." I looked at the calendar on the wall. 2 days left. 2 days until the curtain dropped. I wasn't just planning a party. I was planning an execution of his character. The night of the gala arrived, wrapping the city in a blanket of humid heat. The venue was packed to capacity. I had rented the community hall and decorated it with blown-up photographs of Matthew looking frail in his sickbed, photos I had taken myself for his blog. At the time, I had wept over how pale he looked. Now, knowing the truth, I realized that his deathly pallor was nothing more than a layer of gray foundation he had applied before calling me into the room. The air smelled of expensive perfume and pity. When Matthew arrived, a hush fell over the crowd. He rolled in on his wheelchair, wearing a tuxedo that hung loosely on his frame, an effect he achieved by wearing a shirt 2 sizes too big. He had applied a subtle layer of gray foundation to his face to look pale and deathly. The acting was Oscar-worthy. As he wheeled down the center aisle, the room erupted into a standing ovation. People were wiping tears from their eyes, whispering about his courage and grace. I stood at the front, near the podium, watching him soak it in. He looked humble, bowing his head weakly, but I saw the glimmer in his eyes. It wasn't gratitude, it was gluttony. He was feasting on their emotions. I smoothed my dress, glancing at the venue's laptop. I had preloaded the video file hours ago. It was open, paused, and ready to play with a single keystroke. The trap was set, and the bait was in the room. The speeches began. Local dignitaries spoke, and then it was Matthew's turn. He wheeled himself up the ramp to the stage, declining help to show his fighting spirit. He took the microphone, his hand trembling theatrically. "My friends," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in. "I stand. Well, I sit before you, humbled. The doctors say my time is short. They say the darkness is closing in." He paused for effect, looking up at the ceiling lights as if seeing heaven. "But when I see the white light, I won't be afraid, because I know your love goes with me. This money, this generosity, it gives me one last hope for a miracle in Switzerland." The room was a mess of sobbing. Grown men were weeping. Matthew wiped a fake tear from his cheek. "Thank you," he whispered. "I love you all." He handed the microphone to me. The applause was deafening. I waited for it to die down. I looked at Matthew, who gave me a nod of encouragement, expecting me to sing his praises. I looked at the crowd. "Matthew talks a lot about his journey," I said clearly, my voice strong. "But I think you need to see the reality of it. I have prepared a special video." I pressed the spacebar on the laptop. The massive screen behind us flickered to life. The room expected a montage of tearful medical updates and romantic sunsets. The music I had queued up wasn't a sad piano ballad, though. It was silence. Then the video started. It was the footage from yesterday. High definition, clear and undeniable. It showed Matthew in the garage, wearing gym shorts. He wasn't in a wheelchair. He was standing under a squat rack with 200 pounds of weight on his shoulders. The video cut to the next clip. In this one, Matthew reached over and hit pause on his speaker, cutting the heavy metal music. The silence in the garage allowed the camera microphone to pick up his voice perfectly as he answered his phone. "Yeah, they're eating it up." His voice boomed through the gala speakers, mocking and arrogant. "I'll have the 100 grand by next week. Easy money, bro. These people are sheep." He laughed in the video, a cruel, healthy, boisterous laugh. On stage, the real Matthew froze. His face twisted in rage, the sudden flush of red blood fighting through the gray makeup, making him look grotesque. He stared at the screen, his mouth open, the frail, invalid mask slipping completely. The silence in the hall was heavier than the applause had been. It lasted for 5 agonizing seconds as the audience processed what they were seeing. Then the room erupted. It wasn't applause this time. It was a low rumble of confusion that quickly spiked into outrage. I didn't stop. I clicked the next slide. The screen filled with the bank statements I had uncovered, transfers to crypto vault, and high-stakes poker. Then came the letter from Dr. David Kane, projected in bold letters. "I have never treated Matthew Scott. His medical records are forgeries. He isn't dying," a woman screamed from the front row. "He's laughing at us." Matthew panicked. The fight or flight response kicked in, overriding his act. He forgot the wheelchair. He forgot the limp. He stood up abruptly, kicking the wheelchair backwards so hard it toppled off the stage. He backed away from the screen, his hands up. It's a deep fake. It's AI, he shouted, his voice booming and strong, no longer raspy. But standing there, towering and athletic in his tuxedo, he was the only proof we needed. He had just walked himself into a corner. The doors at the back of the hall burst open. I had prepared for this moment meticulously. 2 days ago, I had visited the precinct with Dr. Kane and the banking records. The detectives had told me they needed him to commit the act of soliciting funds publicly to upgrade the charge to federal wire fraud. 2 police officers marched down the aisle, followed by Dr. Kane. Matthew looked for an exit, but the stage was blocked by the angry crowd. Matthew Scott, you are under arrest for wire fraud, grand larceny, and identity theft, the officer announced, snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. Wrists that had trembled only minutes ago, but were now fighting back with surprising strength. As they dragged him out, he was still screaming, blaming me, blaming the technology, blaming the world. I didn't say a word. I watched him disappear through the doors, the flashing blue lights reflecting off the walls. The crowd turned to me, unsure of what to do. I stepped away from the podium and walked down the ramp. Months later, I stood on the balcony of a new, smaller apartment. The legal battles were messy, and almost all of our assets were seized to pay restitution to the donors he had scammed. But as I took a deep breath of the cool evening air, I realized something. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. I wasn't mourning a living ghost. I was alive. I was free. And for the first time in years, the truth was the only thing I had to carry.
This story isn't just about a marriage built on lies or a financial scam. It is a powerful reminder that there is no single right way to handle betrayal, but silence is often the most powerful weapon. Ivy Scott struggled because she believed that her duty as a wife meant ignoring her own instincts. She judged herself for having doubts, rather than judging Matthew for his actions. She missed the enemy in her own house because he wore the face of a victim. The lesson: never confuse pity with love. Just because someone demands your sympathy doesn't mean they deserve your life, and just because someone is weak doesn't mean they aren't dangerous. True strength often looks like patience to those who are used to reacting impulsively. Embrace your intuition, question the inconsistencies, and remember, the goal of loyalty is to build a partnership, not to destroy yourself for a lie. Thank you so much for following Ivy's journey from the manipulated wife to the architect of her own freedom. It was an emotional ride of vindication, and we hope you felt every moment of her triumph. If you enjoyed this story and love hearing about underdogs who prove everyone wrong, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Tell us in the comments. Do you think Ivy went too far by exposing him publicly at the gala? Or was it the perfect revenge? Type Team Ivy if you think she did the right thing by planning the reveal in silence. See you in the next story.